I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We do have a quorum. We have one member of the executive committee joining online. And I believe we have individual ending, phone number ending in 82. If you could identify yourself so we could rename you in the participant list, that would be helpful.
Supervisor Arstead.
Thank you, Supervisor Arstead. Okay, proceeding on public comment. We didn't have anybody approach myself or the clerk, so we'll move on to item number 4, approval of the April 13th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting minutes, and they were in your packet. What is your pleasure?
Move to approve.
Motion by Vice Chair McEwen, second by Supervisor Mask. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the April 13th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting minutes as printed in your packet signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries and is unanimous. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 5, policy issue discussion and potential committee determination. And we have item 5A, discussion regarding the 2024 annual budget and policy recommendations from the committee. You've all heard the explanation from the chair of finance, Supervisor Robinson. And so we have the review of the mandatory and discretionary program documents. Number 2, review the rates and fees documents. And 3, review the 5-year departmental expense levy document. And the executive committee has one department of oversight, and that happens to be the administration department. Administration has a total budget of $2,865,617 and a levy of $2,329,484, or 81%. And the difference is some grants that we have for justice alternatives that are run through administration. So with that, I will open it up for discussion or comments. Supervisor Robinson?
I think this might be a good chance for us to maybe talk through how we're proceeding, because a number of the, we presented to the committees, and I think we got better as the time went on, and ERC was sort of our maiden voyage, and I think we learned a lot as we moved forward. But if I could just summarize where I think we are, is that most of the committees wanted additional time to reflect, that they were going to look at that mandated versus non-mandated services area. Those committees with reporting relationships with outside organizations and nonprofits, were going to try to incorporate them into giving presentations to the committees throughout the course of the year, so they have a better understanding of how the dollars are spent. And we would look for the committees to also review the rates and the fees to make recommendations and incorporate those into the budget. And I think that given this is the first time through, we'll be somewhat flexible relative to timelines, in that this evening we will be presenting to the board the budget priorities for discussion and then voting on for next week. That resolution's been uploaded into the packet based upon discussions that took place yesterday. But I think while it's helpful to have input throughout the process, it's extremely helpful to get that input earlier in the process, so that the administration can look at if there are alternatives necessary to develop and design a new way of doing things, or other things that we would need that time to react. And again, we're going through a review of the programs, which we've asked the committees to do and provide input on. We're establishing the priorities this month. We'll later in the summer be working on budget assumptions, and those assumptions will be refined by the action that the legislature takes with the state budget where appropriate. And then ultimately, come fall, we'll have the budget before us, presented by the administrator, and then it will be, again, we'll look for the committees for input into that process. And, if people have questions about timelines and other things, I guess we would entertain those now.
So looking for feedback from the executive committee members that we have with us today as what you view and feel how the process is providing those opportunities that were expressed by several of the new members and in fact some of the older returning members as far as the changes that we're offering on the budget process to involve the full board, involve the committees in looking at their oversight role on the programs that they're oversight of. Thoughts? I guess I will put people on the spot. Vice Chair McEwen, what's your thoughts so far? Obviously, you've been on the board a fair number of years, as with several others on the executive committee. So, any feedback from your committee members?
We had on the infrastructure committee. Of course, we had a lot of discussion on the what's mandated, what's not mandated, and then there were some questions on part of these committees or these services are, they get grants from the state, and is it like 27 cents if you cut this program or cut back, or you're not really cutting back the dollar amount, it's a percentage? And how would we know that as far as the percentage for these programs that we have in infrastructure? And of course, John and Chris are on the committee too, and like I said, it was about a 45-minute discussion, and a lot of it had to do with, like I said, the mandated services. How would we know, and the level of service too? What is the amount of service that is required by this program?
Yeah, I think what we're learning is, we're learning as we're building this ship, if you will, this new process. I think we're learning that, obviously, we have a high level, and that is the department budget percentage versus the tax levy percentage, or tax levy budget percentage in comparison to the total budget. However, specific programs are much more unique and not necessarily representative of that percentage. So you're right. I think that's some of the discussion that I've seen at various committees. And so I think, as we build for the future, I think that lends itself to somewhat towards that budget prioritization that we had in the past. But I think that's going to take a lot more refinement and a lot more information that's going to be disseminated in the future. Go ahead, Vice Chairman John.
If I may, and there were some questions too presented as far as, say we cut, item A, what effect is it going to have on B or C that then the county would have to pick up or pay the full percentage of it? And I don't know if that's clear, not clear to me what would facilitate cutting this, what is it going to cost down the road with another program?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. Getting back towards what we were talking about, and when we developed system budgeting, at least for the judicial system, and and Lance has implemented or at least had discussions with all of the various departments about system budgeting. You're absolutely correct. What you can cut here, but if that cut affects another department and increases a wait time or increases, prisoners waiting for a trial, well, then we didn't really save any money. We might, in fact, cost more money than we actually saved. So that understanding of the interactions with programs and those services and how those interact and how one necessarily impacts the other is something that we also got to try to develop. Other thoughts? Supervisor Van Cray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to point out a difficulty that I think that I'm seeing happen, and including myself, that it's hard to look at this in a way that's not similar to looking at your own personal, like your household budget. And so in Health and Human Services Committee, there were some questions about like, well, how much does this thing cost, a non-mandated program, how much does this cost, in a sense that I think people are looking at it as what can we cut per dollar amount and not necessarily what services do we want to provide or not. So I'm not sure if there's a solution to that thought process, but I know for myself even it's hard to think of this as a different way than you do your own personal budget at home.
Lance, your thought?
Well, yeah, just a comment to build on that. I appreciate that comment because that was kind of my reflection as well, hearing, this is the 7th time that Chair Gibbs, Committee Chair Robinson, and myself have kind of gone through this. And that has been one of those recurring themes. There's there's a desire to go more to what's the impact in terms of dollars or tax levy? And it's hard to kind of raise up to that program discussion, and the way that counties budget generally in the state of Wisconsin, and it's the way we budget, that we don't have those line items necessarily. We have people that are assigned, if you think about conservation planning and zoning, we don't have one person that just does one thing. They do a number of things, or the sheriff's office, right? We have a bomb squad. I think that Chair Robinson has used this. We're not required to have a bomb squad. We have one. It's got members, but we don't load all of the wages into the bomb squad all of the time. All of the admin that support it aren't allocated out. We don't, generally speaking, use that. To do that, you have to rely upon some form of analytical, like algorithms to do that, to say, hey, what percentage of each of these classes of activities kind of funnel up into that overhead for those programs. And that was the idea behind priority-based budgeting. The challenge is that it takes a lot of time and energy to do that. But if that really is if we find, to your point, your underlying point, that really is essential to this conversation, perhaps it would behoove us to talk about, we're not going to be able to do it this year, but we can talk about for future years, how do we really, if we're going to reinvest in that, we need to reinvest in whether it's priority-based budgeting or some other tool to get you the information that we did hear in a couple of times that would be helpful. It's just, that's not the way that our budgeting systems are built. My time is allocated amongst a whole slew of things, but in our budget, it shows up, as you all know, in the 600-plus page PDF that you got. It shows up in the personnel budget within administration. We don't have, 4% or 5% of my time is this. So I've heard that that's valuable. I think that's a question for this committee, perhaps as we move forward into future budget. Is that something we need to move toward the program-based budgeting?
The question, that raises, though, is, in other words, okay, and we'll pick on the bomb squad just because it's been used and highlighted. Those members of the bomb squad, if we eliminated, I guess the question becomes, how do we equate eliminating the Bob Squad to actually affecting the tax levy, because those individuals, we're not going to cut, even if we allocated 4% of administration overhead to that program, we're not going to cut administration 4%. So it's giving us a somewhat of a false number that we're potentially going to see as potential tax savings by eliminating the program. Because we're also not going to cut all of those staff that are supporting the bomb squad, they may be utilized in other areas. So I struggle also with the other side of that is we can get we can try to get two allocated, and then the allocation based on the algorithm that we develop is not necessarily going to result in true tax savings or tax levy savings, because we're not going to cut other overhead. In other words, if we only have one person in a department, obviously if you cut that person, you're going to cut the cost of that department, but you're not going to cut the cost of overhead from administration, from the finance department and others. So that's the other struggle that I have with priority-based budgeting. Vice Chair McEwen.
Chair,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another thing that was discussed at the highway infrastructure was when we were talking about, constructing and maintaining our county roads. The infrastructure committee wants a 7 rating pacer, so that of course has a cost, that's associated with it, but that's the level of mandate that we chose, and we could, reduce it to 6 or 5 or 4, but then there's going to be consequences with that down the road. So it's, there's that level of, mandated services, which I think the committees are responsible for choosing the type of, same thing with snow plowing. Do we want to, go out, 2 days later to plow, or does it got to be right away? So, it's hard to, nobody, and everybody's going to say, no, we don't want to wait that long for plowing, and we want to keep our roads up. So, that's basically, up to the committee to decide that.
Supervisor Mask.
oh, I was just going to comment on the bomb squad because I'm on public safety. Yeah, so I can wait until we get to public safety. One of our recreation deputies also is on our bomb squad. Our recreation deputies are funded by the DNR, and one of them has a more heavy-duty pickup truck because he has his bomb squad attire with him, and it's like he's on call 24/7. So that was what I was thinking.
Yeah, and your point's well taken. I mean, like I said, we wouldn't be eliminated even if we eliminated the bomb squad duties for that individual. We're still not going to eliminate that individual because that individual's used, like I said, in different areas of the county, and he has a full-time sheriff job, if you will, and he volunteers for the bomb squad. But you're 100% correct. Other thoughts? And I don't really have an easy way to narrow down the elimination of a program and how we then back out, if you will, the cost that's been allocated from overhead as we have in priority-based budgeting. Priority budgeting tried to give you that direct allocation and indirect allocation because obviously the finance department doesn't provide a direct service to the public, but it provides the service to the entity, the county, being able to provide all of the employees. So, Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think the important thing for me is that committee chairs, that our board, that our administration be open to the suggestions that are made, because people have a certain idea or thought process about whether it be the tax levy or the budget oftentimes I hear us in these meetings, we've talked about the tax levy, the tax levy, the tax levy. Well, there's the overall budget as well. I brought that up in infrastructure, which is over $200 million. So there's a significant amount of money. There's work being done. 3/4 of the work we're doing is being funded by some other source, generally speaking. I'm of the mindset, and I hope that we're open to this, that just because we are receiving funds to do something does not mean we need to decide to do it. That isn't a direct attack on any department or anything like that. It's saying what should be our overall imprint. So for me, it's not just a tax levy, because part of that too is the value of your property. Your tax levy is such in correlation with the property tax, or the property value. The cost in your pocket is what really matters to the people out there, to a lot of people, especially those on fixed income. So to me, we should talk about the tax levy. That's one thing. We have to consider what the costs are to the person's pocket. We also then have to consider the overall budget. I do sense a bit of resistance oftentimes when the suggestion is made to cut that, oh, be careful. You don't know what you're talking about. There's some indirect cause or some indirect issue. Oh, if we cut this person or that program, well, that person's doing something else. I get all that, and I think it's really important to say that to people, to our supervisors. But at the same time, I'm really looking for an openness to the conversation, that some of the things we do, maybe we don't need to do, or maybe it doesn't rise to the level of having to cost so much money. And so for me in this overall process, and I've said it before, I appreciate all of this information. It's very helpful to dig down into the weeds a bit. But I do, just to finish that up, I do think we risk the board's effectiveness if we're not open to these good discussions about the budget.
I would say two comments, and I think you're 100% correct. I mean, whether the dollars are coming from the federal government, whether they're coming from the state government, they're all coming from taxpayers. The question, though, still goes back to the board, and I haven't heard. I've sat through every meeting on all of the standing committees, and I haven't heard, other than generalities, saying we need to cut 5% of government. But that does mean that we got to have some specifics in what programs are we talking about that we want to cut. Because if we just say we want to cut 5%, that's an approach. I don't know that that's an effective approach. That would be what I would say, is we have to be more intentional in what we want to eliminate. Supervisor Robinson.
I just want to pick up on Supervisor Dickinson's comments, and I'm somewhat in agreement with those, and I think we need to look at it is we allocate resources through the budget process, and it's dollars and it's personnel. And many times, let's look at the administrator. When we have additional programs, he's pulled thinner and thinner, in more and more directions. So we sometimes compromise our ability to really deal with priority items when we add others. So I think that you raise a valid point, and that we should be looking at them. There are times too where, it is possible for us to stop a service such as retail food inspection, and then we're relying on Department of Trade and Consumer Protection. And at one time it was every 5 years for an inspection, or 3 years. And is that what we want our restaurants to do? So I think we just need to be aware of the ramifications. What is our service goal? What are the outcomes, and what are the other factors that we ought to use in doing that? But if you look at the 5-year spending, we've gone from 30% of our budget being levy generated to 25% over the last 5 years. So it's a significant infusion of other dollars. Some of that is associated with the pandemic and some of the initiatives on the federal level, but some of it is fee related, but we are looking to lower the dependence on the property tax, which also increases in some cases user fees and other things. Those are all factors that we should be considering and evaluating, and we look for input. I think the administrator is looking for input. The Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee is looking for input, and we ought not exempt programs that are fully funded by other sources from that review process.
100% agreed. Other thoughts? Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make the same offer to this committee that we made at all the other committees relative to department heads. If there are things that you want to know about any of the programs that are alluded to within the administration section, please let me know. Chair Gibbs referenced before the meeting started, he asked me a question about the justice alternative system. Largely, we have them go to public safety for a lot of their discussion. As Vice Chair Mask knows, we have Lori Yari show up and talk about those programs on occasion. But certainly, if you want to have additional information, I can bring that to you. But I certainly appreciate the last couple of comments from Vice Chair Dickinson and Chair Robinson. I think that the opportunity to evaluate mechanism of delivery, even if you do have a priority program or service that, hey, this is important for the people of Marathon County, I think you both raise a very important question, which is, do we need to be the ones to directly provide it? I don't want to give specific examples, but I do think there are occasions where perhaps in our history, we have stepped into a role to deliver a program or service that is needed, but perhaps there's an opportunity for us to incentivize other entities, whether they be private sector, nonprofit sector, or other governments, to do that work. And I think that's one of the things when you looked at the strategic plan you just approved, we should reinvest ourselves in one of the goals there. And this discussion is helpful for me to do that. I can do that again through our McDevco meetings, really sitting down with our local government partners and evaluating, are there shared service opportunities where it's not as though the county needs to lift the entire load for a service that is, even if it's mandated, we don't need to lift the entire load. There's a different way to do that. So if you have programs or services you want to know more about, I can try to get additional information for you to Supervisor Van Cray's earlier point. What are these individual costs? How do they break down? I can just tell you that the Justice Alternatives Program is the lion's share of our budget. We have a contract that's about $1.3 million a year for just what I alluded to, those exterior services, service providers. But if you do have specific questions, happy to try to take them on.
Thank you. I guess, speaking of programs, the state highway maintenance agreement we have, take care of the state highways. Has those agreements gone up, or are they the same, or is it costing us more money, and do we have to maintain the state highways? Just one issue.
Administrator Leonard, please.
Sure, I can try, and I'm hoping I'm going to be accurate on this, and I'll follow up with Commissioner Griesbach. The state of Wisconsin is very unique in the country in that we are the only state that performs the work on state and interstate highways on behalf of the state of Wisconsin. But the routine maintenance agreements we have, my understanding of their operating is that they reimburse us for our true cost of doing that work. So when you look at the second document on your list that was referenced, the rate and fee document, there's a lot of rate and fees that are referenced in there from the highway department that really aren't rates and fees for the public. They're the actual rates and fees we charge to local governments and the state for utilizing our equipment, because every hour of an individual's work is billed to a state project, as well as the specific piece of equipment they're operating during that work. So my understanding, and I'll follow up with Commissioner Griesbach on this, but my understanding is the routine maintenance agreement that we have with the state is neither
Fixed amount.
it's neither an enterprise fund that is essentially building a reserve, and it's not losing us money. It's a wash. We recover our costs, but I'll follow up with him specifically on that. I am not aware as to whether or not counties are required by state law to sign the routine maintenance agreement, but my understanding is that every county
Does.
participates in that. But I can follow up on both those two things.
Question?
Supervisor
So
Mass, go ahead. please.
Thank you. We cover state highways. What about the interstate?
We also plow those and maintain those in maintenance. Now, major repairs and/or upgrades to decking, bridges, and that is contracted out by the state. Prime example would be right now State Highway 107 in the village of Marathon, that they're resurfacing the deck on the two bridges that are just north of the village, actually in the village, and the approach and exit on both of those bridges are being repaired, but it's contracted. The state signed a contract with the company that's currently doing that, and they did that earlier this spring. So the county
So we
doesn't have a role.
contracted,
So the county doesn't have a role in that portion.
what about the plowing? Are we contracted with that?
For plowing, absolutely. We're reimbursed based on the hourly rate.
Okay, thank you.
Other discussion?
I'd like to bring, excuse me, if the Supervisor Mask, I'd like to bring up a couple things about public safety.
Go ahead, please.
It came up in a couple meetings that I've attended about CART, our Crisis Assessment Response Team. You know, that's not mandated, but it keeps people with mental health issues out of jail and hopefully into help. And our canine unit is not mandated, but our dogs sniff out a lot of drugs, and they are first response when it comes to sniffing out fentanyl. I know that our deputies have the appropriate medication, I can't think of the name right now, to give to the dogs and themselves in case they do find fentanyl. I mean, there are just so many things in public safety that are not mandated that are crucial to the health and safety of Marathon County. And since we have affiliated ourselves with the FBI, or they affiliated with us, I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but we have been able to cross county lines and state lines to bust people. So there's so much out there that's an overlap that's not mandated that makes a difference. And I just hope that people realize that these non-mandated things do help a lot. I know in public safety they do, but in other areas they do a lot too.
Thank you. Any other discussions? Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this is a budget discussion, but it certainly has financial impacts, and I think we need to start, it's referenced in the work plan, and at some point we need to develop a strategy around it. And I think the budget is your primary policy document you adopt each year. So I'm just going to put this out there for you guys to think about. As you've probably seen announced through Wisconsin Counties Association, there's been a lot of discussion about the local UW 2-year campuses and kind of the challenges that they're facing, financial, facility challenges. And I certainly want to give credit to our local campus executive. I think Dr. Toms is doing very well. I mean, if anyone wants to watch the extension education Economic Development Committee meeting. She gave an overview of just some of the things she's doing to really try to bring people back to that campus, and it was really good to hear. That said, how are we going to use our budget as a policy document to move forward with identifying what is that future state we're pursuing? I think is maybe something that, whether it's this committee working with the EEED committee, or it's simply that committee is tasked with doing something, that's just one of those big looming, if people ask me, not that what keeps me up at night, but what do I think a lot about, that I perhaps don't have solutions for, that is one that is a real challenge. And I think the 2024 annual budget is something where we're really going to need to figure out what is our approach to addressing that challenge through that document.
I think, Administrator, you hit on a huge, huge item, especially, especially long-term, and the capital requirements, or requests at least, that have been presented to the county on behalf of, through UW-Stevens Point and the campus exec over there. And to their credit, this board has said, well, we're going to hold off till we have something more definitive long-term moving forward. I don't know what that long-term, and so that becomes the $6 million question, and that is, what is the long-term future of the campus over there? I think that's being true throughout the state. You're seeing those challenges, for example, in Richland Center. They basically closed the campus there. And so I'm not saying that UW Stevens Point Wausau Center is next on the list. That's not my point. My point is there's significant requests for capital, and what and how do we have that discussion that if we're going to invest those dollars and taxpayer dollars into the campus to sustain those facilities long term, and if there's a change in use, what would that use be? And I don't, again, I don't have an answer, but I think we need to at least think about that and figure out how do we position ourselves so that we're doing the right thing. The worst thing that we could do is invest a lot of money in maintaining and upgrading something, and then later find out that that it's not going to be utilized for what it was designed for. Other discussion items? Well, with that, we will move on. Again, if anybody does have specific questions on programs or that we want to have more discussion on the executive committee level, by all means, just provide me or Administrator Leonard an email or phone conversation. We'll have that discussion. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Just have a question for the committee chairs who are here. Would it be, we're carrying this over from meeting to meeting. Would it be helpful if we're present at all of those meetings where you're talking about the budget? Or do you want to bring it back here? Craig, with you, I'll be there because I'm on the committee, so it's...
I think I'll leave that up to you. I think Health and Human Services has a clear vision of the information they're looking to get from departments. And so I don't know if it's necessary for you to be there for those discussions, but you are more than welcome to come as long as you let the chair know ahead of time that you're attending the meeting.
I've always believed the chair.
Guilty. Any other discussions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to operational functions required by statute, ordinance, or resolution and/or policy. And we have none. Education presentations, committee discussion, none. Next meeting and date and time, announcements, and future agenda items. Committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. And our next meeting is scheduled for June 8th, 2023 at 3 p.m. Any other announcements? Seeing none, we're down to item number 9, and we'll give you part of your day back until later this evening at 7 o'clock. Motion by
Move to adjourn.
motion by Supervisor Mask and second by Vice Chair McEwen. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.